chapter 12 of Gary Paulson's Tucket's Gold. This is the last chapter of this book, and there's one more volume after this one's over. It was evening. Francis pulled the Pinto up on the edge of a small rise and looked back on his little caravan and smiled. They were close to 30 miles from the butte, and it was well out of sight. They had come into the juniper and rolling hills, a whole new country. But there had been a few moments when Francis thought he would never get away from the village. The feast had been wonderful. Kashi's wife, named something that sounded like Anas, had baked corn bread in the large earthen ovens outside the houses that resembled beehives, and they had venison and rabbit stew and hot bread to dip in the gravy, and talked, with Billy translating, until after midnight. That was when Billy had found out they were leaving the next day. "I'm not going," he said as they left Kashi's house and moved back to their own room to sleep. "Of course you are," Lottie shrugged. "You go where we go, and that's how it works. And we're leaving in the morning to find Francis's folks. Two Toes said if I stay, I can hunt deer with them in the fall. And if I get a deer, I'll become a man, sort of. You're 7 years old. They don't go by years. They go by if you can kill a deer with a bow and arrow." "No," Francis had shaken his head. "They go by many things. Hunting deer is just one of them. You wouldn't truly be a man for at least 5 years yet, no matter what Two Toes told you. There are many tests to pass." "Still, this is a good place to live." "You're 7, Lottie had cut in. "You don't leave your family when you're only 7 years old." "I don't care. I'm staying." Lottie spluttered. "Billy, how can you think of leaving me and Francis? Your own sister, your own—" He looked at Francis. "Francis, you tell him." Francis had remembered the stubborn little boy who had sat backward on the mule and hadn't talked for so long Francis thought he couldn't talk. I could just tie him up and bring him, he thought, if only he didn't have that sword. But Lottie solved it. "If you stay here, there won't be anything to spend that gold on. There isn't a store for 1,000 miles, and nothing even like rock candy." "Oh," Billy said. "Well, then I'll come with you." And they had gone at dawn the next morning. They took only 4 horses, leaving the 2 extra for the village as a token of gratitude for all the help that people had given. The horses could be ridden, but better yet, the horses could pack corn and deer meat up the grade to the village. Until now, Francis and the children had been carrying by hand. Had been carrying by hand. The weather had been grand all day, and with all the new clothing and gear and the decent buckskin pack saddle, they made good time. Francis let Lottie lead the pack horse with the gold and the other equipment, and sent Billy off to the sides to hunt with his bow. Billy came back about noon with a huge tom turkey in front of him on the pony, and Francis decided to make camp a bit early so they could clean the turkey and cook it. He saw a bend in the arroyo ahead, down to the left, with some large cottonwoods that meant water. There had been rain a few days earlier, and it made for good grass for the ponies along the bottom of the arroyo. Francis set up a camp beneath the cottonwood. Billy cleaned the turkey, and Francis cut it in strips to cook over sticks above the fire Lottie had started. And while the meat was cooking, he picketed the horses and then took his rifle and headed out to the west to take a look. Francis smiled when he saw Billy pick up his bow and sword and head off to the east. Billy was still a boy, but in many respects he had grown so fast his actual age almost didn't matter. To take a large tom turkey with a bow was a feat. Turkeys were smart and hard to hunt, even with a gun. His short time with Two Toes had completely changed Billy. Francis climbed a ridge on foot and looked back on the camp. He was a half-mile away and a quarter-mile higher, and he moved still higher until he could see for miles to the north and east and west. At first he could see nothing unusual, but something caught his eye to the east, a strange line in the scrub forest, and he realized after a moment that it was some kind of road or heavy trail. It came straight from the east, but before it came to their campsite, it curved away to the north and disappeared in the trees about 2 miles from the camp. A trail met people, and judging by how wide and well-traveled this one looked, a goodly amount of people, although he could see no dust. It was getting close to dark, and he moved back toward the camp warily. Tempers were still flaring over the war with Mexico, and the Comancheros were somewhere to the south. People moving on the trail might not be friendly. He had just decided that it would be prudent to keep clear of the trail as they made their way north when he heard a twig snap behind him and turned in time for somebody or something to hit him so hard on the side of the head that it seemed his brains was turned loose, and he was completely unconscious before he hit the ground. "Ah, my dear boy, we meet again. I must say, though I didn't think we would again see each other, I had my hopes, not to say dreams. Francis swam up slowly from some deep place in his mind. You left us in a very sad state, if you'll remember. He knew the voice, but at first couldn't quite place it in his memory. The pain in his head didn't help. Imagine our surprise. We were making our way toward that fine trail to see if we couldn't come up on a traveler who would, let us say, help us in our need when we saw the light from the fire this girl started. And while coming toward the light, we found you, Courtweiler, and Dubs. They had come upon him once before he found Lottie and Billy and had taken everything he had. He had tracked them and run them down and caught them sleeping and taken it all back, plus their half-dead mule. I should have shot you, Francis said. He opened his eyes and tried to sit up, but they had him tied wrist to ankle. He stared up at Courtweiler. The little man in a ragged black suit and top hat stroked his beard and smiled. Yes, my boy, you should have. I don't make that same mistake. I won't make the same mistake. What I don't understand is how you seem to come on to such good fortune, this charming girl to cook for you, and a veritable fortune in gold and silver. As I think I may have said to you once before, our good luck is your very bad circumstance. Francis' mind was clearing. The hulking Dubs must have carried him back to camp, or from the feel of it, dragged him. Lottie was sitting across the fire. There was a welt on her cheek that would soon be a bruise. Billy. Courtweiler hadn't mentioned Billy. Just Lottie. Francis craned around and could not see the boy. I told them we were on our way back to our family, and that they'd come looking for us if we weren't back soon. Hush, child, or Dubs will strike you again. Lottie grew quiet. Fine. Now, my boy, was there any more gold where you found this? Francis didn't answer. Where was Billy? Francis had cast out to the west. Francis had cast out to the west. The two men had come on him from the west, or maybe the northwest, so they probably hadn't seen Billy. The boy was still out there and might come walking in on them at any moment. He had to get loose. The two men had turned away to look at the gold, and Francis tried his bonds. They were so tight that his hands had gone to sleep, tied with a piece of line from the horse pack. But there was a strand he could feel loosening, and he worked at it. He shook his head at Lottie, meaning not to mention Billy, and she nodded, but he wasn't sure if she understood. How fortune does change, Courtweiler turned from the pack. We were down to eating our shoes again and on foot, and now we're rich, have a girl we can sell to, well, whomever, and have horses into the bargain. Honestly, my boy, it's almost worth letting you loose just to catch you again and see what else you can get. A whirring went past Francis's face, and a stick seemed to pop out of Courtweiler's right shoulder. An arrow buried to the bone. Oh! Courtweiler grabbed at the arrow, but before he could pull it out, there were more fluttering sounds, and three more arrows zipped past Francis. One hit Dubs in the neck as he was straightening from the pack. The next took him full in the chest, and the last one struck him in the stomach. Dubs reached up and slowly pulled the arrow out of his neck, then actually took 3 steps toward Francis before he stopped, settled back until he sat, and then slowly went over on his side and lay dead, his eyes never closing. It wasn't over yet. Francis had been working at getting his hands free the whole time, and he pulled them loose just as Courtweiler jerked the arrow out of his shoulder and started for him, fumbling at his belt for a revolver. Francis, here! Lottie was up and running. She grabbed Francis' rifle from beside the pack and threw it. Francis caught it, turned, and fired without thinking, without aiming, and saw the dust puff out from Courtweiler's coat as the bullet hit his chest and drove him back to fall near Dubs. Francis pulled the ropes from his legs and felt for his knife at his belt. Gone. But Courtweiler still lay still. It was over. Francis stood there panting and turned and saw Billy beside Lottie. Francis, Billy said, I saw them and saw you tied up and started shooting. I only had 4 arrows with me. I didn't think there wasn't time. And then the big one pulled that arrow out of his neck, and I thought you were dead for sure. Oh, Lord, did I kill him? Just a minute. I'm going to be sick. Lottie held his head while he threw up and then led him away and held him while he took deep breaths that sounded like crying. In silence, Francis took the sword from Billy's shoulder and started digging 2 graves back by the cottonwoods, chopped at the sod until he was down to the loose sand beneath, and scooping it out until he was far enough down to cover the 2 men. Then he dragged them over and dropped them into the place. After taking the revolver from Courtweiler's belt and a flint and striker from his pocket for starting fires, he folded their arms over their chests and covered them with earth and then with rocks to keep the coyotes out. He didn't feel sorry for them. They would have killed him, after all. But he felt sorry for Billy. When he was finished, he stood over the graves and looked north. He could not see far. It was dark, and even the glow from the fire only penetrated a few yards, but he looked north just the same and thought, somewhere up there in west, a little are my parents. They would start in the morning when the light was good and Billy was all right. They would start then. It was still a long way, and they had seen so many buried from wounds and accidents and cholera and just living. So many, and he hoped there would not be any more graves. They would start in the morning. Wow, you're ready to read in the next book, aren't you? I am too. That was it for Tucket's Gold by Gary Paulson. Be back with more next time. Bye.